That's fine. All right. Thank you, Ashley. Okay. All right. Does that sound okay? Can you hear me? Thank you. Hard to tell up here. It's good to see everybody. I'd like to thank Burl, the deacons, Ashley and Kay, everybody that's helped with these outside services. I know you may not understand. There's a lot of stuff that goes on, and definitely couldn't do it by myself. So I sure appreciate it. You know, we've been talking about heaven. This is the third in a series we've been wanting to do and talking about, and we've already talked enough about heaven to know, I hope, that you can look forward to it. I think it's going to be sweet up there. That's what we've always heard, and that's what we're looking at. Well, today we're going to be looking at, will heaven be boring? And I was telling Tony and Linda about, some of the upcoming weeks. Next week, I hope we're going to talk about our bodies, what we'll look like, what we'll be like when we get up there. We're going to talk about the children. We're going to be talking about children that die young, or maybe that are killed by abortion. I believe that's a terrible thing. But those children are in heaven. Those children are children. They're people. They have spirits. They have souls. And they're going to be in heaven. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the other place that you have the option of going, which is hell. Somebody told me a couple of weeks ago when we started this, if you're going to talk about heaven, you might all talk about hell. Well, of course, we're going to have to talk about hell, because that's the only other option you have. And like I've told you, it doesn't matter if you believe in it or not. We talked about all the statistics. When you're going down the road at night, I read this the other day, I just thought it was a good illustration. And there's somebody out there waving, trying to get you to stop. Maybe you're going down Dinkin's Bottom here, and you just swerve out and go around that person. If the bridge is out, it doesn't matter if you believe it or not. You're going in the river. So people's up here, they're waving at you, telling you, there's a heaven and there's a hell. You're going to end up one place or another. It doesn't matter if you believe it or not. That's not going to change things. You can fool yourself and tell yourself that your whole life. But when you get to the end of your life, you're not going to have the option of saying, oh, there is a heaven? Well, that's the one I pick. That's not the way it works. But today we're going to talk about boring. You've heard people, I mentioned it a few weeks, people will say, well, heaven's going to be boring. You're just going to sit on clouds and listen to harp music, or it's just going to be like a long church service or a long choir practice where you're singing all the time. They don't want that. I don't know why, but they don't want that. But it could be a little boring if that's actually what it was. I could see that. It might get old singing in a choir all the time. You might get tired, but our bodies are not going to get tired. But I want to talk about boredom. You hear a lot of people, and you may hear a lot of at work or maybe in your families that talk like that. So this will give you a little ammunition to witness to them, to tell them, well, no, that's not the way heaven's going to be, if you hear what I'm talking about it like that. Or you hear some of them say, oh, I'm going to party. I'm going to hell with all my friends, and we're going to drink and party and just have fun for eternity. That's what I'm going to do. Well, obviously they haven't read the scripture. They don't know what's waiting for them in hell. But if the Bible is true, which I believe it is, and it is the most authoritative thing that we have in this world, hell's not going to be a big party. So this that we talk about today will give you some things that you can maybe tell some of your family and friends, or maybe even you yourself, if you've had any doubts, could think about that. But boredom makes people do weird things, and I want to mention a couple of those. Before we get started, I like to tell you a little story sometimes. But there's a true story I looked up, and this happened a few years ago. There was a 33-year-old truck driver named Larry Walters in Los Angeles, and this is something that he did. You can probably look it up and read it on the internet yourself. He lived just south of L.A. International Airport. And he'd sit out in his backyard and he'd drink Pepsis and eat peanut butter sandwiches and watch the planes come in and out. But it got bored. He got bored sitting there doing that all the time, so he come up with this great idea. he was going to go get some weather balloons, and he was going to fill them with helium, and he was going to tie them to his chair, and he was going to float up and look at everything from a high view. And he figured, well, I might go up 100 feet or so, but he said, just in case, I'm going to bring my BB rifle with me. And if I get too high, I'm just going to shoot out a couple of them balloons and float back down, you know, to the earth. Well, that sounded like a pretty good idea, but, you know, the story said they didn't know how many six-packs of, they put Pepsi in quotes, so I kind of wonder if it might have been something besides Pepsi he was drinking when he came up with this brilliant idea. But he went out and bought 45 of them pretty good size heavy-duty weather balloons. And he brought them to his house. He bought a big old tank of helium to fill them up with. So he filled up all them balloons. He tied them to his lawn chair there. He had it tied down to the ground so, you know, it wouldn't take off. And he had some neighbors that probably been drinking some Pepsi with him out there to help him get all this done, you know. So he did that. He went out, he filled up 45 helium balloons, tied them to his chair. He went in the house, fixed him a couple of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, came out and got him a six-pack of Pepsi and his BB rifle, sat down in his lawn chair, and he was ready to go. So he told his neighbors, he said, let's go. So they did. They cut the ropes that was holding him down, and he shot up. But he didn't go 100 feet. You want to know how far he went? 11,000 feet straight up in the air. And I don't mean slowly, I mean lickety-split like. You can imagine. Well, he zoomed straight up into the landing pattern of the LA airport there. And the pilot of an approaching DC-10 radioed the tower. Sounds like something you see on cartoons, but this was an actual occurrence. The pilot radioed the tower and said they just passed a man in a lawn chair. And the control tower told that pilot to report to their office as soon as he landed. I think they were afraid he might have had a Pepsi or two himself. But can you imagine being in that passenger plane and looking out the window? That's like the Twilight Zone, you know, and a kid telling Mama, hey Mama, look, a guy in a lawn chair with balloons. You know, she probably got whipped or something for waking her up and telling her that. But it actually happened, and eventually they took helicopters up and they rescued Larry Walters. The airport had to close and divert all landings and takeoffs, you know, until they got that situation taken care of. But the helicopters went up and they played tag with this guy at 11,000 feet. I'm not sure exactly all the details of how they got him, but they did get him down. And of course, when they did get him down, he was surrounded by TV crews, and they asked him, you know, Mr. Walters, what made you do that? And you know what he said? Well, he was bored. There was nothing better to do, so he got this idea. But they asked him, you know, are you going to do it again? Larry said, no. He meant, and they also asked him about his BB gun, you know, his plan to shoot and pop some of the balloons. But he said he dropped the BB gun because he was holding on for dear life when he took off. He dropped his sandwiches and his drinks and his BB gun. He was just trying to hang on. But boredom does make you do silly things, and it does cause problems in our lives. You know, researchers have found that you know, it's boredom that causes the most problems in marriage. You know, it's right up there with money issues. Of course, money's usually number one that causes trouble. But boredom is another thing. You know, if you get bored with your wife or bored with your husband, sometimes you'll go out and do things that you shouldn't do. And we all know, if you've ever been a teenager, which I was, and probably most of you were, boredom can make a teenager do stupid things. You know, sometimes they'll go out and they'll get involved in things that they don't need to be involved in because they're bored. You know, I grew up in the summers at Grandma's house. You know, I didn't get bored too often, but if I complained about boredom, she would find me something to do. And usually it was something I didn't want to do. Dr. Jeremiah in his book tells the story of a great-grandmother in England who went on a 5-year crime spree. And when they finally caught her, they asked her why she did it. Again, the answer was boredom. Nothing better to do. And retirement specialists, you know, if you talk to them, or some of you already may be retired, you know That's a common thing. When you're retired, you do get bored. So they tell you, to plan what you are going to do while you're sitting at home or after retirement. Because a lot of people go out and they do just get so bored and they stop their activity and they die early because of boredom. But there are a lot of people that seem to believe heaven will be bored. The Bible has a lot of descriptive words about heaven, and we're going to look at some of them today. But there will be no bored citizens of heaven. Even after 1 billion years, we'll still be there, and it will not be boring. Last week we looked at like 5 things you'll find in heaven. Well, today we're going to look at 5 things, or 5 reasons that heaven will not be boring. Number 1, heaven's not going to be boring because God's not boring. I confess, some people can be boring. Some sermons can be boring. Tommy York tells me that some of the best sleep he gets is when I'm preaching on Sunday mornings. I don't know if he's kidding or not. I can't tell. But yeah, we can get bored. But in heaven, from eternity past to eternity future, God is there. God is a God of action. He's not a God of boredom. Just think, everything that you like in this life that gives you joy, God designed that. You didn't just learn it. God made it. He's the God of love, compassion. I think He's got a great sense of humor. You look at some people around you and you know God's got to have a sense of humor. Psalm 16:11 says, "Thou wilt show me the path of life. In thy presence is fullness of joy. At thy right hand there are pleasures forevermore." So what exists in God's presence where we'll be? Fullness of joy. What's at His right hand? Pleasures forevermore. Author Randy Alcorn, I like his books too. But he says this: our belief that heaven will be boring portrays a heresy that God is boring. There's no greater nonsense. Our desire for pleasure and experience of joy comes directly from His hand. He made our taste buds, our adrenaline, our sex drives, all the nerve endings that relay pleasure to our minds. He designed all that. He designed our imaginations, our capacity for fun and joy. He designed it. And yet we could accuse Him of being boring. That's quite arrogant for humans to think that we came up with all these ideas. That's what He said. But He is the source of everything that we find fascinating. He created music. I love music. I know Ashley loves music. So many of us do. You come in here in the mornings and I hear the music playing on your radio. He designed that. We didn't come up with that. He gave these certain individuals the ability to write that music. Bach, Beethoven, all these great composers, all the great singers, He gave them the skills to sing those songs. He did everything. He created humor and laughter, and He made some people just funny. You can just look at people and know they're funny. He made all the animals. He made the stars that we talked about a couple of weeks ago about the heavens. He paints the skies. I've seen some beautiful pictures that you like to share of sunsets and sunrises. Do you think that just happens? No, it didn't just happen. God painted it. He designed it. He made the mountains. He makes the rainbow. He did all that. And how can you read the Bible and think it's just a boring book? Sometimes I'll fall asleep reading the Bible. But that's not because it's boring. That's because maybe I'm tired. But just think of all the stories that you've enjoyed in Scripture. When I was young, I used to love the stories out of the Old Testament, like Samson. The stories about his strength. Of course, David and Goliath, Daniel in the lion's den, Moses in the Red Sea. All that happened under God's direction. God designed that and planned it. It wasn't just happenings that happened. What about a Savior in the New Testament who healed people, who cast out demons, who turned over the tables, who fed the 5,000? These aren't boring stories. This Savior raised people from the dead, and after they killed him, he rose himself. There's nothing boring in there. Isaiah 40, verse 12. Let's read the first few verses. Tells us a little bit about God and his design. It says, "Who hath measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, and meted out heaven with a span, and comprehended the dust of the earth in a measure, and weighed the mountains in scales, and the hills in a balance? Who hath directed the Spirit of the Lord, or being his counselor hath taught him? With whom took he counsel? With who instructed him, and taught him in the path of judgment, and taught him knowledge, and showed him the way of understanding? Behold, the nations are a drop in the bucket, and are counted as small dust in the balance. Behold, he taketh up the isles as a very little thing." Our God built this earth from nothing. He laid out the tape measure. He laid the foundations. He is not boring. He's a God of action. We need not worry about being bored in heaven. If God designed all this for our short little lives down here, can you imagine? We can't imagine. Only what we're told that he has ready for us up there. If you think he's going to give us all this down here for 70 or 80 years, what's he going to give us up there forever? I think there's going to be plenty to do. Our God is not boring. Reason number 2, heaven's not going to be boring because we'll not be boring. Whatever our personalities or temperaments down here, up there we're going to be a whole lot better. We're not going to be grouchy up there. We're not going to get tired and snap at people up there. You know, I've mentioned it before, and we'll discuss it here maybe next week. We're going to have a changed body. Paul says this in 1 Corinthians 15, 42 and 43. "So also is the resurrection of the dead. It is sown in corruption, raised in incorruption. Sown in dishonor, it's raised in glory. Sown in weakness, it is raised in power." And in 51 and 52 he says, "Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, in the last trump. For the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall all be changed." Our new heavenly bodies will not be boring. We'll go into detail about that next week. But they won't age. They won't get tired. They won't malfunction or mess up on us. Our knees won't lock up when we're trying to climb stairs, or when you get down to the floor and you struggle to get back up. I sound like I'm under attack. But we'll be able to do that when we get to heaven. We'll have all the energy and drive that we can handle. Do you ever look at kids playing and say, oh, for that energy. We can't even remember what it was like to have all that energy. It seems like they're limitless. That's the way we'll be in heaven. No matter how boring or depressing a person might be here on this earth, there will be a radical change. You know, these boring people sometimes that we work with, maybe you got somebody in your family that's just boring as skim milk. But when you get up there, it's not going to be that way. Their personality will also be perfect. Reason 3 is heaven will not be boring because our friends are not boring. Let's look at a list of who lives in heaven. It's in Hebrews 12, 22 and 23. "But ye are come unto Mount Zion, and unto the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn, which are written in heaven, and to God the judge of all, and to the spirits of just men made perfect." Notice the 4 groups in those scriptures who'll be there. First is an innumerable company of angels. Heaven is full of angels, and I believe we'll get to know them as friends. Won't that be exciting? Just to be able to talk to the angels. They've been around a long time, and I bet they've got some stories to tell us. I bet they can put some details on those stories that we were talking about in the Bible. Also the general assembly and the church of the firstborn, who are written in heaven. I believe this refers to the church, those who have heard the gospel and responded to it. I think that written refers to that book, the book of the Lamb, the book of life that we talked about. If we have our reservations, our name is written there. All those people will be there. Then, of course, God's going to be there. The Lord Himself will be there. It says the spirits of men made perfect. I believe this is a reference to the Old Testament saints. You remember Moses and Abraham, Isaac, all those guys. They were perfect in their faith. God took them to paradise. And we'll be talking about that. Do you see anyone on that list who's going to bore you senseless? I don't think so. I think it's going to take me a long time to be talking to some of those people. I enjoy spending time with friends. You know, I love just what we're able to get now is just to walk around and talk to you in the parking lot. I love to talk to you. I could spend hours just walking from car to talk to you. In heaven, it's going to be that plus untold time. We won't run out of time up there. I won't have to come up here and get ready. We'll just be sitting around talking to each other forever. Won't that be good? Don't you have friends that you love to get together with and share a meal and maybe play some cards or maybe go to a movie, do something with? I do. I love to do that. You know, hospitality is a spiritual gift. And it's one that Kay and I both have and is high on our list because we love to entertain people. I love to have people over to the house for a meal and like I say, play some rook or play some Uno or watch a movie and just sit there and laugh together. I love doing that. It makes me feel good to have my friends over. But when we get up there, we'll be able to do that as long as we want to. You know, the Bible talks many times about the marriage supper of the Lamb. I believe there's going to be a buffet up there that we're just not going to believe. And it's going to be wonderful. Our friends will be there. You know, and like I said, I think we'll get along better in heaven. There might be some people down here that we just don't get along that good with. But when we all get up there, I think we're going to see eye to eye. I don't think we're going to have to argue about politics or the road construction that's going on or anything else. We're going to be happy up there. And we're going to be happy with each other. Imagine having discussions with all those heroes I've been talking about. It's going to take me a while. And we'll make friends with Christians of all ages. I didn't really think about that till I read it in the book, but can you imagine? These Christians that came over on the Mayflower, we're going to have friends up there that came over on the Mayflower. All these friends, these people, all these great preachers. Can you imagine just meeting these great heroes that we've read and heard about of the early church? Talk about these great preachers. I had some listed here. George Muller, Martin Luther, William Tyndale, Charles Spurgeon, I really like to read. Billy Graham. You know, Billy Graham was a contemporary. He was here. He lived right here in North Carolina. But I don't know if you all ever met him. I never met him. But up there we'll have time to circle around and meet all these people and have discussions with them and talk to them. We'll exchange stories with great missionaries when we get up there. All those stories, William Carey, Jim Elliot, Amy Carmichael, Lottie Moon. We've taken up this Lottie Moon offering for years. You'll get to speak to Lottie Moon when you get up there. Heaven is going to be an amazing time. Unlimited fellowship. It's hard to understand, but we can trust it. And Jesus gave us a small glimpse of that, remember, on the Mount of Transfiguration. He was out there with Peter, James, and John, remember? And Jesus walked out a little ways, and Elijah